I was scheduling a monthly payment for 3 cents and designing a poster-sized postcard to demand my penny back.
A real Reddit account, retold in the poster's words. Here's how the poster tells it. A few years ago, my spouse and I moved out of an apartment and into a condo. Like most tenants, we expected one final statement covering the last bit of rent, our deposit, and any move-out charges. The bill arrived. We paid it, and as far as we were concerned, that chapter was closed. We had boxes to unpack, a new place to settle into, and no reason to think about the old apartment again. Then, about a month later, my spouse called me about an envelope from the apartment company. Inside was another bill. Not for a repair, not for missed rent, for 2 cents. I work in tech, so our first reaction was disbelief. Somebody's system had apparently decided it made sense to spend far more than 2 cents on paper, printing, and postage just to collect it. Still, I figured this would be easy. My spouse printed the statement, I grabbed 2 pennies from our change jar, and since the old leasing office was along my commute, I stopped by in person. I walked in, handed the manager the bill, and said I had the 2 cents right there if she wanted to clear the account. She told me the office did not accept cash. That was it. I explained that I wasn't expecting a formal cash transaction. I thought we could both acknowledge how ridiculous the bill was and just remove the remaining balance. She refused. So I asked whether she genuinely wanted me to write a check for 2 cents, mail it in, and make the company process that check. Her answer was yes, send the check. They would process it. Then she went back into her office and ended the conversation. And there it was. The poster says, I went home and did exactly what I had been instructed to do, just with a tiny adjustment. I set up my bank to send the apartment company an automatic payment every month. Not for 2 cents, for 3. That meant the company would now have to deal with a 1 cent overpayment every single month, unless somebody chose to fix the situation. Then I added the second part. Since I knew how to write code, I built a small automated system that sent a monthly letter apologizing for the overpayment and requesting a refund check for the extra penny. I also found an online service that could mail postcards in absurdly large formats. My plan was to start normally, then make the postcards bigger and more impossible to ignore if the company kept playing along. The whole setup took hours, over a debt worth less than the lint in a pocket. But once the system was running, it would keep going on its own. And then the first day of the next month arrived. I got a call from someone higher up in the company. After introducing himself, he apologized in a way that made it very clear the message had reached exactly the right desk. The poster says the caller admitted they had made a mistake, asked me not to continue the monthly campaign, and promised the company would never contact me about the 2 cents again. So I shut down the payments, stopped the letters, and never heard from them after that. For the cost of a few hours and one very determined penny, the account was finally gone for good. Okay, that's the poster story. Now, here's my verdict. First, the jury. The top comment loved the symmetry of it. Another person had answered a tiny bill by deliberately overpaying and then demanding the refund. Another popular reply pointed out how quickly a company loses money chasing pocket change. One phone call or one printed statement can cost more than the debt itself. And several people shared stories about businesses sending bills for almost nothing, sometimes even threatening collections over amounts that barely buy anything. The apartment management was in the wrong here. Not because they sent an automated 2-cent statement. That part could happen. They were wrong because the manager had a simple chance to correct an obvious system error and chose to turn it into a rigid rule instead. Could the monthly payment system and oversized postcards have been excessive? Sure. That is the strongest argument against the poster. But the company explicitly demanded a mailed payment and promised to process it. The poster complied with that instruction to the smallest possible degree. The comments are right there with me. If you insist on collecting every cent, you should be prepared to account for every cent you receive. If a company demanded payment for 2 cents, would you send the exact amount, overpay by a penny and request refunds, or build the full postcard system? Cast your vote. If this verdict sat right with you, leave a like and subscribe so the next case shows up in your feed automatically. Now, let's hear the next one. Case 2. I learned that a floor mate had stationed herself by the residence hall water fountain, acting out my walk for an audience and telling them I was after her boyfriend. Here's how the poster tells it. I lived on an all-women's floor, where the bathroom, water fountain, and laundry were all just a few doors away. If I was leaving the building, I wore a bra. But I wasn't putting one on just to refill a bottle or brush my teeth. One evening, I stepped out in a fitted white tank top, walked down the hall, filled my water bottle, and went back to my room. The shirt covered me, but it showed the outline of my chest. The poster says there were a few people gathered outside nearby rooms, but I barely noticed them. It was a normal, quick trip down the hall in my own building. Not long afterward, one of the women from that group knocked on my door. She was polite at first, but she asked me to wear a bra whenever I went into the hallway because her boyfriend had been looking at me. I hate confrontation, so I apologized, even though I hadn't done anything to him, her, or anybody else. For the rest of the night, I put on either a bra or a sweater every time I left my room. That should have settled it. The next day, my roommate told me she had overheard that same woman talking about me in the bathroom. Apparently, she had turned my 10-second trip to the fountain into an entire performance. The way my roommate heard it, I had supposedly been barely dressed, lingering around the fountain, posing, and making a deliberate show for her boyfriend. Then the woman started physically reenacting it for the people around her. And it got stranger. That night, I passed her and some friends while heading to brush my teeth. I was in pajamas and still wasn't wearing a bra. She stared down at my chest, and the group started giggling. I still tried to ignore it. Then the resident assistant emailed the entire floor, saying anonymous complaints had come in about people being insufficiently covered in the halls. Now it had become everybody's problem. The poster says, I remembered something important from orientation. That woman's boyfriend did not attend the school. At the time, outside visitors were not supposed to be staying in the residence hall, and masks were required in shared indoor spaces. So I used the same anonymous reporting system. I reported that non-students were being brought into the building and that at least one of them had been walking through the halls without a mask. I didn't name anyone. I just reported conduct that broke the actual rules. The next morning, the resident assistant sent another message. From then on, unfamiliar visitors would have their IDs checked to make sure they were students allowed in the building. The way I saw it, the woman no longer had to worry about her boyfriend seeing me in the hallway. He had a much bigger problem, getting into the building at all. Okay, that's the poster's account. Stepping out of the narrator's seat, here's my verdict. First, the jury. The top comment suggested a hilariously literal form of compliance, wearing the requested bra while leaving off the shirt. The poster admitted she did not have the confidence for that move. Another popular response told her to take this as proof that she had nothing to be ashamed of, and plenty of people made the obvious point. If the boyfriend stared, managing his behavior was his job, not hers. I'm with the comments. The floor mate was in the wrong. She took her boyfriend's wandering eyes, made them the poster's responsibility, then turned a private request into public humiliation and a building-wide complaint.
The only reasonable objection is that anonymous reporting brought stricter guest enforcement to the whole residence hall, not just one person. Fair, but the poster reported a real rule violation after the floormate used the same system to police her body. That is proportionate, clean, and fully earned. And that, right there, is karma served. Defend the verdict. Was reporting a real guest rule violation a fair response to being publicly shamed, or did it sweep too many other residents into the fallout?